My nephew kept asking me to keep a spare house key, just in case, until I found out he'd already made copies for someone I'd never met. My nephew Jordan stayed with me for a few months last year, while getting back on his feet after a rough patch. Once he moved into his own apartment nearby, he insisted I keep a spare key to his place for emergencies, and in return he asked to hold onto a spare key to mine as well, saying it only made sense given how close we lived and how often he stopped by to help with things around the house. It seemed reasonable at the time. Family, helping family, nothing unusual about it. He'd occasionally let himself in to drop off groceries or fix something small while I was at work, always texting beforehand to let me know. About 4 months ago, I started noticing small things slightly out of place when I got home. A chair pushed in differently than I'd left it. The thermostat set a few degrees warmer than my usual setting. Small enough details that I assumed I was simply misremembering how I'd left things that morning. I mentioned it to Jordan casually, half joking about needing to pay closer attention to my own habits. He laughed it off, saying he'd probably adjusted the thermostat during one of his visits without thinking to mention it. The unexplained little changes kept happening though, more frequently than his usual visits would account for. I started keeping closer track of exactly when Jordan actually came by versus when these small discrepancies appeared, and the timing didn't always line up cleanly. One afternoon, I came home earlier than expected and found my back door unlocked, something I was certain I hadn't left that way that morning. Nothing appeared missing at first glance, but the unease sitting in my stomach felt heavier than it had before. I decided to install a small camera near my back entrance, mostly just to understand the pattern, rather than immediately assuming the worst about my own nephew. 2 weeks later, reviewing footage after another unexplained discrepancy, I saw Jordan letting himself in during a time I hadn't expected any visit, accompanied by someone I didn't recognize at all. The footage showed them moving through my house casually, the stranger looking around rooms like he'd been there before, comfortable enough to open cabinets and glance through drawers without hesitation. They stayed nearly 40 minutes before leaving together. I sat with that footage, feeling a mix of confusion and growing alarm. I confronted Jordan directly, showing him what I'd found. He hesitated before admitting the truth. His friend Marcus had been going through a difficult housing situation, and Jordan had been quietly letting him use my place occasionally while I was at work, believing it was harmless, since nothing had ever actually gone missing before. I asked how long this had been happening, longer than I wanted to hear, going back nearly 3 months, using a copied key Jordan had made without ever asking my permission or even mentioning it existed. I did some checking afterward and learned, uncomfortably, that Marcus had a prior record involving property-related offenses, information Jordan claimed he hadn't known when this all started, though I struggled to fully believe that given how long the arrangement had continued. I changed my locks immediately, taking back the single spare key Jordan still had access to. I filed a report documenting everything, mostly to have it on record, given the unauthorized access and copied key involved, even though nothing had technically been taken from my home. Jordan and I are still working through the trust this broke between us. He apologized repeatedly, insisting he never meant for it to become something larger than a favor for a friend in a tough spot. Key Jordan still had access to. I filed a report documenting everything, mostly to have it on record, given the unauthorized access and copied key involved, even though nothing had technically been taken from my home. Jordan and I are still working through the trust this broke between us. He apologized repeatedly, insisting he never meant for it to become something larger than a favor for a friend in a tough spot. I believe he didn't intend real harm, but intentions matter less than the fact that someone I'd never met had quiet, repeated access to my home for months without my knowledge or consent. Some trust, once handed over so easily, turns out to need boundaries I simply hadn't thought to set clearly enough the first time around.